Hi, everybody. I just wanted to spend the next sort of 20, 30 minutes talking about tech adoption in law firms, especially, and why we have issues with tech adoption and how we might want to resolve them. Now, the way I want to approach this is by being really honest and instead of kind of preaching to people and telling you what I think you should do, instead, I'm going to talk about some of the experiences that I have had. And I'm going to talk very candidly about a few projects that I've been involved in. Some of them have been amazing successes, some of them have been complete failures. And I think it's really important, especially to talk about failures. And sometimes when I talk about, how you should do an adoption strategy for a piece of tech, I might say some things that you don't necessarily agree with. And the reason you don't agree with them is because you kind of don't know why I'm saying them. So that's why I'm going to start by going through 4 case studies of some projects that I've worked on where adoption's been a challenge. And after I've done that, I'm going to go through some like common principles that I think you can kind of draw from all of these learnings. So the first project I want to talk about was my first ever one, and I'm going to call it Zephyr for the purposes of this video. Now, it wasn't actually called Zephyr; it was actually a different name. But let's use that name for now. Now, what this project was basically described as like an AI-powered end-to-end matter management platform. Sounds pretty cool, right? Sounds cool. It was designed to improve internal efficiency. It was designed to be like a portal that clients could log into, so that instead of lawyers emailing documents to them all the time, you could just have things at the touch of a button. And then the other aim of it was to kind of build some data analytics into the firm and kind of answer questions like how many of this kind of project are we doing, or what market trends are we seeing in this area. So this was actually my first project. I was fresh from legal practice, dropped in from being a lawyer into basically a product manager because this was a homegrown, bespoke product. I had a development team behind me. I had like a UX designer as well working with me. So for anyone who's kind of done that kind of stuff, I think you'll kind of agree with me when you say that it's quite a big step to be dropped in the ocean there without any training and suddenly be a product manager. But hey, that's what happened. So, I came into this with very much kind of like, let's just make some amazing tech and people are gonna use it. If it looks good, it's gonna be better than the clunky systems that people use now. And, it's just gonna be the excitement that will generate off this thing is gonna be amazing. So built it. This video is not the place to go in sort of all the errors are made from a product management perspective. I'll reference a few of them. But when it came to launch, kind of the message was there's no need for training on this thing. It's just going to be so intuitive. You guys just pick it up and you use it. It was, we used the tagline, I think, built by lawyers for lawyers. This thing was just going to work for people. And then when it came to launch strategy, that it was actually presented at the partners conference in front of every single partner in the whole firm. It's a massive firm. So it was what I described as like a big bang launch. So suddenly became immediately available to everybody. Although we did advise people use it on like sort of like low stakes matters. So not your most important transaction of the year, but stuff that kind of mattered a little bit, but not too much. So what happened the day after we launched it? Well, I came at this from the angle of like, I love tech. Like I've always been very tech savvy. I know how to code. I like to keep up to date with all technological developments, all that kind of stuff. So I kind of thought, well, I'm excited by it, therefore everyone else is going to be excited by it. But when we came to launch it, we actually didn't really get many people even open the software. And I think the reason for that is that all those things I said at the beginning, like, improve internal efficiency, improve client collaboration, capture data analytics. These are kind of like noble goals, but not really things that a busy lawyer in the trenches actually cares about that much. They're not really specific enough for people to kind of say, oh, I've got to use this thing. The only people that used it were kind of like me, that kind of liked using tech for the sake of it. And that kind of person is actually quite rare, I think, in a law firm. So we had a problem whereby people didn't really see the point in it. A lot of people were quite scared by this client login thing. Like they didn't really like the idea of clients seeing their work in progress documents. The few people that did log into it and use it kind of realized pretty quickly that A, it was buggy, and B, it was pretty much designed around how I personally worked as a lawyer, and it didn't really work and cater for how lots of other people worked. So the tool had to be rebuilt, and I'll be honest with you, the whole thing was pretty much a complete failure. But what lessons I learned from this? Well, the lesson I learned from this is first and foremost that to the extent you do get people using the tech, it has to work. It can't be buggy, and it's got to seem to be intuitive to use, and it can't just be based around like my personal workflows. It's got to be based around how your target user base works. There's no good working for me. Like, I was the one person that it was kind of irrelevant whether it worked for or not because I wasn't really a user of it. Everyone else was going to use it. Secondly, I learned that you have to find a reason for people to care about this stuff, and you've got to make the pain points and the way you communicate these things super tangible for people. Like lawyers and efficiency. Interesting. Some people say lawyers don't really care about efficiency because of the billable hour. Actually, I think lawyers don't really care about efficiency because it's too vague a concept for them to get their heads around. They need something a bit more tangible. And I'm going to talk about that in a second, what that might actually mean in practice. I think it was a mistake also to say that you should only use this on like projects that don't matter, because that kind of means that if the underlying jobs people are trying to do in the system don't matter, then people don't really take the system seriously. And I think sometimes people make this mistake with software pilots that they use it on like a dummy matter, and really you just need to kind of suck it up and get it used on something that actually does matter to people, because it's only through doing that you're actually going to test the thing to its limits. Don't choose the most important thing in the world, but don't choose something that people don't care about. It's got to be on something that does matter a little bit to people. And then finally, probably most obviously, don't do a big bang launch. Like, this was a big error, and I see people making this time and time again. But I know the appeal of getting a new piece of tech and just saying, right, I'm just going to suddenly unleash this to the world, and it's going to be amazing. I'm going to be like Tim Cook, like launching the iPhone, right, the new piece of Apple tech. But you're not Tim Cook. Like, if you do that, you will do what I did, and you will embarrass yourself in front of a lot of people. Don't do that. Instead, embarrass yourself in front of a very, very small group of people. Learn from the errors that you made, so that when you do then do it in front of a wider group of people, it's much better. So yes, Zephyr 1.0 did not work very well, but the good news is that people saw the promise in it, and we actually got funding to rebuild the whole thing. Zephyr 2.0 kind of came out, and luckily they decided to retain me on the next iteration of it. And I made a few key changes here. The first thing I did was say, like, lawyers don't care about the things that we were pitching this around. Don't care about, these high-level vague concepts that you might see in a PowerPoint presentation, like internal efficiency. They need something more specific. So the question was, how do we determine what specific thing to base this around? And what we decided to do was kind of speak to the lawyers to find out what they cared about. Like, why would we guess? Like, why would we just guess that people care about something, spend loads of time and money building something, and then see if they use it? No, why don't we ask them what they care about now, and then sort of read between the lines a little bit, and try and frame a pain point around something people care about. And what we decided to do around was closing checklists. Like, people were doing closing checklists in Word. They were managing transactions that were very high value using a word processing tool, and that was causing people pain. So we decided to basically pivot the whole project around that. We lost the whole client collaboration thing. We kind of said, let's get people comfortable using the system first and then bring that stuff in. And so we just tried to keep it super simple and super relevant for people. That was the point. This wasn't an easy thing to kind of get by the sponsors in the firm. A lot of people kind of criticized my ambition a little bit. They said, you need to be a bit more ambitious here. Where's the AI gone? You need some AI in there. But, eventually I kind of won out and said, we'll bring this stuff in, but only to the extent it actually solves something people care about. So as a result, the Zephyr 2.0 had far fewer features, but the features it did have were super relevant to people. And most importantly, they worked. Like, I might do another video one day on all the product management mistakes I made, but I didn't just kind of rush this one through. Actually considered stuff like technical debt and user workflows and stuff like that. So the system had far fewer features. The features that were there worked really well and worked from a technical perspective too. So when the thing was kind of ready to use, first project on it, I didn't make the same mistake of going back to the partners conference and announcing it to the world. Just kept it on the down low really, and chose a project that a friend was working on, which was a restructuring transaction, which was kind of not the biggest thing in the world, but still a pretty significant matter for him. And used it on that, and it worked really well on that. And we actually didn't really have to do much the PR thing on this project, because he then kind of spoke to someone else who then used it as well. A couple of the trainees working on the project kind of recommended to use it on other things. So I think the lesson I learned was, community led and word of mouth is a really, really effective way of doing stuff. The other thing we did for this was we actually did do some training. Now, this can be a bit of a controversial thing, because you might think in this modern world that you shouldn't need training to use a technology product that's been kind of done in modern era. And I agree with that. But I think the thing I would say is that the function of training is not necessarily to educate people how to use the system. It's to educate people on when to use the system and what the value of using that is. Because otherwise, if you just kind of let people in, they kind of have this lingering question of like, is this product even designed for this situation? And training can be a very, very effective way of addressing those issues. So how did Zephyr 2.0 work? Well, it went pretty well. Within a couple of months, we actually had 50 projects using it, which was way more than I thought we'd get. Some teams kind of, didn't like it. They ignored it, did things the old way. But I kind of learned that, 50 is a really, really good number. I didn't want to have this spiraling out of control. We had a really good kind of like word of mouth network behind it. There are a lot of lawyers kind of directly working with me on new features and new ideas they had for it. And we got into really good cadence on it. And actually to kind of round this case study off, it's actually now been acquired by a leading tech provider. So that's an achievement I'm really proud of. So lessons learned on Zephyr 2.0. Firstly, really important to speak to users before you spend any money or do anything. Now, I'm just going to pause here, because a lot of people gave me pushback when I suggested doing this on the project. And the pushback was usually something like, we need to show people the art of the possible. Or, Steve Jobs didn't speak to people when he made the iPod, for example. Like those kinds of objections I got a lot. Now, what I would say is you've got to get yourself in the right ballpark here. That's the goal. It's not about users giving you ideas or users telling you what to build in the product or users telling you what tools to buy. It's about you being in the right problem space. And that was crucial here, because we could have ended up in a number of problem spaces. And the problem space we ended up in was the closing checklist stuff. And we knew that as the right problem space because we'd spoken to people and they told us, I have a problem with closing checklists. Great. Now, as somebody in the innovation team and a product manager, it's my job to then decide how we tackle the problems people have in the closing checklist space. So now that we know that they have a problem with closing checklists, what are the specific things they have a problem with? And do they need to be doing those processes at all? Is there a better way they could be doing those processes? What's the overall goal? The genius Steve Jobs thing comes in terms of kind of like identifying the highest value problems to solve, getting yourself in the right ballpark, but then coming up with those creative ideas to solve the problems. So that was kind of how I dealt with those things. A lot of people still disagree with me on that. That's fine. I understand where you're coming from, but my own perspective is that it's just a no-brainer to speak to users before you start spending money on any tools. Okay. So the second thing I learned was that lawyers don't tend to use tech just because techie people are excited by it. This was the key distinction between the two projects. The first one was like, there's AI and super duper new technology. Lawyers don't really care about that. Like a very small fraction did, like people like me did, but most lawyers are really busy. They don't have time to really engage with the stuff. They just want to go home, get the work done, get the billable hours down. And you need to be realistic about that. We'll talk a little bit about how you might be able to change the dial on that, but please don't market your products to lawyers as being things like, AI powered or, all these kind of things that are just not relevant to them. They don't care. That stuff might work on like techie people. It does not work on lawyers. They want very specific, relevant help on what pain points you're solving. The third thing I want to talk about here is training. And I've already talked about this, but you need to do some training. People always ask about it. Some people are really not confident using software. even if it's very easy to use, they just want to be handheld so that they don't make any errors with it. And most importantly, you need to do this training stuff to kind of tell people why the system's valuable. So those are the 3 lessons I learned on the 2.0. Speak to users, don't frame things in terms of tech, and do the training. Okay, so 2 more projects to talk about. These are tools that the firm already had. They're not bespoke product builds like the first 2 case studies. This one is the e-signature platform that the firm had. Now, this system has been in place for years. Nobody used it. Lawyers were pretty much exclusively signing stuff, either in person in signing rooms. This is pre-pandemic, by the way, this case study. Or they were kind of doing that thing of sending signature packets out to signatories and then having them sent back to them, etc., and all of that stuff. So at the same time, I knew from my own experience that signing's a pretty stressful thing. It's one of those things that clients hate when you get wrong, and because it's a process that directly involves the client, you can deliver some incredible legal advice on structuring a transaction, but if you mess this stuff up, you don't look really bad on it. So I kind of saw this as quite a good opportunity for further development and usage of a tool that the firm already had. So I've done the Zephyr projects at this point, and I was bought into that ideology of let's speak to the users first. And that's exactly what I did. I spoke to users to understand what exactly they did when they did signings and what were the things, sometimes they said things to me and I kind of said, how do you like that process? And they're like, yeah, the process is fine. And what they really needed was a kind of semi-independent party to tell them, no, what you just told me is crazy. Like, you're telling me that you have just gone through like 15 Word documents and separated out the signature pages, put it into PDF, sent it out to a signatory, they send it back, then you're piecing it together into more PDFs, then you're combining it back into the executed copy. That is mad. Like, what you're doing there is mad. You realize how manual that process is. They just needed somebody to kind of tell them that, basically. So I built this process map based on my feedback that I'd got from how people did e-signings. I posted this on Twitter about 3-4 years ago, and I think people were quite taken aback by how manual it looked, but it was a really great thing just to demonstrate to like senior people, look, this is what people are doing when they're signing a document. And it's this, I'll try and share it if I can, but it's this page which is like so many boxes and arrows on it, you can just tell the process is horrific. So the point here is that to date, the e-signing tool had been marketed as an e-signing tool. And what I tried to do was switch the narrative a bit and say, yeah, yes, it's an e-signing tool, but actually, I don't think things you care about are really like, security or digital certificates or any of that stuff. You guys don't care about that. But what you might care about is the fact that you can literally upload a Word document to it. And you don't need to do any of that signature packet nonsense. Like, it just cuts that out completely. And when people saw that work, they were like, whoa, like this is pretty game changing. This is going to save me hours and hours and hours. So this is a really great case study in why, like, speaking to users, identifying the exact pain points and then making the pain points relevant to people was so important. The other thing I want to bring up on the e-signature side of things is that this is obviously an area that's interacting with law and regulation quite heavily. And if you're working at an international firm doing an international rollout of this stuff, you need to know what the different laws and regulations are in each jurisdiction. So that was something that was also holding people back using it because they didn't know whether it was actually compliant. They didn't know what the firm standard practice was. So getting that stuff right was pretty key. The final thing I will say on this, which is interesting, I think, is that people didn't tend to use it actually for like the really big important transaction documents. Most of the usage actually was targeted around things like board minutes and shareholder resolutions. And there might have been, because this is a new system, people wanted to use it with kind of documents that didn't matter quite as much. But I think also, like, from a psychological perspective, people seem to think there was some sort of ceremonial aspect to signing big important transaction documents. And they quite like the fact that, we all kind of got up to this big event and then suddenly it was this grand hurrah and everyone popped corks and champagne. And they didn't really like the fact that we were doing that with like a one-click button. So, I'll leave it to you as to whether you agree with that or not, but I just thought that was quite an interesting point to note. Finally, the other thing on e-signatures was that the firm obviously spent money on this tool, and the other discussions we had around this were like, how does the spending on this tool translate to return on investment in the business? And it was done in two respects. First of all, it was done in terms of like, does this help write-offs on transactions? And most certainly it did. On those board minutes, like clients would often look over narratives after the matter and think like, why did I just pay like $20,000 for a bunch of lawyers to do board minutes? This makes no sense. So, that was translating the value of the tool into money directly saved by the firm. But there were also some stuff that was done around passing the cost of this stuff on to clients, and they were very, very happy to pay for it, frankly. So, this was good to sort of get that business aspect of these tools out there. So 3 lessons from this case study. Users don't really care about like product names. Again, they care about the things you fix. Like, make these things super relevant. I'm sure this point is coming across loud and clear. Secondly, you're going to have to grapple with some legal issues with these things. Like, so e-signature is a great example of that. It interacts with the law directly. So make sure you're covering those topics off. And then thirdly, do think about business goals. Too often, law firms buy tech for the sake of it. They buy it because they feel like they should have it. And actually, that's what happened with the e-signature stuff. And it's happening so much this year, actually, with this AI stuff. People are spending enormous amounts of money on AI tools. And it leaves me flabbergasted that people are not thinking like, what is the actual ROI on this? Does it save us money? Does it help us win more work? Does it help us retain employees? Like, it's just unheard of in any other industry for those kinds of discussions not to be the first kind of thing you talk about. So that was something I learned on this project. Okay, final case study is what was called the Ways of Working project. Now, this is a slightly different one because the underlying technology used here was OneNote. But what happened in this Ways of Working project, this happened within a particular practice group where basically a bunch of partners in the group had decided that they wanted to improve well-being in their team and satisfaction of their lawyers, starting from the business outcome, right? Great. So what they did is they did actually what I would do on projects, which is talk to people in the team. And they set a couple of associates off on a challenge of canvassing the entire team to establish what were the good practice ways of working, what were the bad practice ways of working, what can everybody do to improve how they work together. Great exercise. A couple of associates did it, fed back to the partners. Everybody jointly kind of heard each other. Things like, that annoyed associates were being brought out. Like, for example, partners doing hand markups of documents. This was brought out as a pain point. And the culmination of it was a OneNote document that all these best practices and pain points were documented in, and people kind of agreed to work in a particular way. And this OneNote was sent to everybody. Everybody had it on desktops. They always referred to it. And importantly, everyone kind of acknowledged it by email. They said, yes, I agree to do these things. So if somebody did something that wasn't captured or was in conflict with the ways of working, you could call them out and hold them accountable for it. So I think this is a super cool project because it's not really a technology project. It's kind of, OneNote was the underlying technology, but I think this shows the importance of culture. Culture, especially from the top, is pretty fundamental from this stuff. You couldn't really do this project just go by randomly imposing a bunch of processes on people. This ways of working had to be done through people agreeing to it. It had to be consensual, and that culture has to come from the top. And then the other lesson I take from this is that all these tech and innovation projects, they don't have to involve tech necessarily. They don't have to be snazzy. They don't have to involve AI. They don't have to be groundbreaking. But just having the right culture in place, identifying the right pain points, can deliver massive change. Okay, so these were my main case studies, and there's 4 key takeaways that I take from all of these. Number one, it's not all about the tech. The tech has to work, has to be intuitive, but ultimately, if nobody even opens the tool, then it doesn't matter how good your tech is because no one's going to use it. So you have to make the tech relevant to people. And yes, that includes all this stuff about generative AI. Lawyers might care a little bit about generative AI. Is it going to make them care enough to actually change how they work and open a new tool? Maybe, maybe not. It remains to be seen. The point here is it's not all about the tech. Secondly, a rich understanding of users is vital for all of this stuff. So please, please, please speak to users before you spend any money on this stuff. Don't just take the view that you buy a tool in and you show people the art of the possible. That is a very, very expensive way of testing whether people care about something. Start with a discussion. Like, are you in the right ballpark? Are you buying tools in a problem area that people care about? Because if you're not, you're going to be wasting money, and you don't have to buy a tool to work that out. So speak to people, use that data to objectify these discussions, buy tools that are going to deliver value in the areas people care about, and communicate the tools in a way that's relevant and specific and resonates to them. I'm not going to do my rant again about, the lack of value in speaking to users because Steve Jobs didn't do it. Like, I don't know what Steve Jobs did. I suspect when he made the iPod, he probably had a fairly good idea of the day-to-day struggles people grappled with when they were listening to music on the move. Just going to say that. Okay, so the third thing, identify the business benefit. Too many firms, too many legal teams are getting lured in by exciting tech at the moment. Don't buy it just because it's exciting. Buy it because it does something, either at a personal level, like does it save people time on a particular process? If so, what process? Is it a process people care about saving time on? Fundamentally, does it also provide value at a business level? Does it help you reduce write-offs on projects? Does it help you become more profitable on fixed fee projects? As a legal team, does it help you stay within budget? Does it help you improve diversity in the workforce? Does it help you retain your most talented employees? All this kind of stuff. Think about stuff. Don't just buy tech for the sake of it. And the final thing I want to talk about is culture. So none of this works without a decent culture. Unfortunately, lots of legal professionals are kind of not always geared up for adopting tech in the way that other industries might be. But don't give up on it. Like, there is stuff you can do to shift the dial. Wherever you work, there will be pockets of individuals that are more open to change than others. Maybe just forget about the people that don't care about the change and start with the people that do care, and let them kind of establish using new tech or being open to change as a cultural norm. When you have these kind of successes in your tools, communicate them back to the business. Don't just kind of keep them to yourself. You want to show the people that maybe aren't open to these things that you can have real positive messages from these things. Having senior people encourage people to do these things is pretty key as well. Especially in law firms, lots of people talk about billable hours and financial incentives, but I actually think one of the biggest incentives is a partner telling an associate they did a good job. These lawyers are often pretty insecure people that thrive on praise. Leverage that when it comes to your cultural initiatives as well. So hopefully this was an interesting kind of talk. Key messages, not all about tech. Understand how users work and make stuff relevant to them. Identify the business value of your tools and try to do some stuff that shifts the dial in terms of culture. That's all I've got to say. Thanks very much for listening.